Hi everyone, welcome to today's lesson. We're carrying on with this Alla Prima still life. So all these videos are filmed in the same session, but just split up for kind of manageability in terms of watching them. So you remember the first session we created a wash drawing. Second session I worked over the wash drawing to create this general sort of block in of what I'm looking at. And this session I'm going to be spending time developing the forms, so particularly kind of these kind of medium-sized forms going through the skull, trying to create a better sense of being kind of three-dimensional in that area. I'll primarily be working with the same brush from last session, the smaller brush, and I'm also just going to pop over and get a finer detail brush as well. You wouldn't necessarily need a finer brush if you're working on something larger, but this is just quite a small piece that I'm demonstrating with. So yeah, I recommend pretty much something you can get in to do sort of smaller details, but primarily you want to try to be working with the slightly broader brush at this stage. So I'm going to be developing forms and also altering colors slightly. Altering colors because the lightest portions of the drawing feel a little bit too blue to me, too cool. So I want to make some shifts to that. So I'm using a little bit of CAD yellow and CAD red mixed into my lightest color, just to warm it up a little bit. It's always worth remembering that pure white is actually quite cool. It's kind of a grey almost. Yeah, that's a bit better. So I just want to paint that over those lighter portions. I'm going to start going in with this smaller brush just to correct the shapes. So I'm working with the same blocks of values, I'm just making adjustments to the shapes between them. can now go back to my slightly broader brush. I want to start turning this skull, turning the form of this skull a bit more. So I've got some slightly more kind of intense little colours glowing through the back of this skull, because the skull's kind of semi-transparent. So you can see it's starting to sort of gel together a bit more as I add this kind of like knitting it together. So you've got these, I'd already established the general feel of the skull, and then this process is kind of knitting together those details I'd established previously. So sort of filling in those orangey bits that I left out as I was just blocking in a looser manner. So it's coming together quite nicely. Hopefully you've been following along with all the minor adjustments that I've been making. So not quite at a stage where we're adding tons of detail, but it's getting very close to a point where I can stop sort of working on these more general shapes and forms and start picking out little tinier details. So not too far off that. That'll be the next session. Because there is a sort of almost like a kind of lace work within the skull. So this particular subject has that kind of detail going on within it. And I want to try to make sure that comes through effectively in my piece. Yeah, it's coming along pretty nicely. And then I think next session we'll get it done. It's not too much more you could possibly add working Alla Prima like this on a subject kind of as small and delicate as this one is. Just trying to get the right level of balance. Because one thing we're looking for, at least in this sort of establishing point, is making sure that the skull we know is sort of relatively symmetrical. So the viewer wants to feel like that's the case. You need to make sure the symmetricality of it comes through when you're working on something like this. Otherwise it starts to feel a bit wonky, and we don't want it to feel too wonky. So if I blur my eyes, it's starting to kind of come together pretty well, which is good. I think I've got most of the main portions of the skull down. And it's ready for the kind of final pass over. This stage in an Alla Prima, I'd probably take a little bit of a break and then maybe do a final pass over, get everything kind of working together nicely. But yeah, that's it for today, and I'll be carrying on in the next session and should be finishing this one off.